The year was 1974, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez was living her dream. At 42 years old, she had already made a name for herself in the world of archaeology. Her passion for ancient civilizations had taken her to dig sites across South America, but this trip to Peru was different. This time she believed she was on the verge of something that could change history forever. Elena had been studying old Spanish colonial documents for months. These dusty papers, hidden away in university archives, told stories of vast Incan cities that had never been found. Most experts dismissed these accounts as myths or exaggerations, but Elena saw patterns that others missed. She had a theory about ancient trade routes that connected the mountains to the coast in ways nobody had imagined before. Her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, watched from the kitchen table as her mother packed her bags. Elena carefully wrapped her tools in soft cloth, brushes for delicate work, small shovels, measuring tapes, and her precious camera. Sophia had seen this routine many times before, but something felt different this time. Her mother seemed more excited, more focused than usual. "How long will you be gone this time, Mama?" Sophia asked, her small hands fidgeting with her breakfast spoon. Elena knelt down beside her daughter's chair and smoothed back Sophia's dark hair. 6 weeks, my little explorer. Maybe 7 at the most. But when I come back, I might have incredible stories to tell you about the people who lived in Peru hundreds of years ago. Sophia's grandmother, Carmen, stood at the stove making coffee. She had raised Elena after her own parents died young, and now she was helping raise Sophia while Elena traveled for work. Carmen worried about these trips, especially the ones to remote places where communication was difficult. But she understood that Elena's work was important to her, and she supported her daughter's dreams. The flight from California to Lima took most of a day, with stops in Mexico City and another city along the way. Elena used the long hours to review her research notes one more time. She had identified specific coordinates in the Peruvian highlands, where she believed an undiscovered Incan settlement might be waiting. The location was remote, requiring a difficult journey by truck and then on foot, but the potential discovery was worth the hardship. In Lima, Elena met with officials from the university that was supporting her research. They provided her with permits to excavate and connected her with a local guide who knew the mountain trails. The guide's name was Miguel Vargas, a man in his 50s who had been leading archaeologists and researchers into the highlands for over 20 years. Miguel had a weathered face and calloused hands that told the story of a life spent outdoors. He spoke both Spanish and Quechua, the language of the local indigenous people, which would be essential for communicating with villagers in the remote areas they planned to visit. Elena felt immediately comfortable with Miguel. He was professional, knowledgeable about the terrain, and genuinely interested in her research. "The place you want to go," Miguel told her as they studied maps in a Lima cafe. "It's very isolated. The nearest village is a full day's walk, but I think you might be onto something. My grandfather used to tell stories about stone buildings hidden in those mountains." Elena's excitement grew. Local legends often contained grains of truth that had been passed down through generations. If Miguel's grandfather had heard stories about stone structures in the area she planned to search, it could mean her research was leading her in the right direction. The journey to the highlands took 2 days by truck, bouncing along roads that were barely more than dirt paths carved into the mountainside. Elena's back ached from the constant jolting, but the spectacular scenery made up for the discomfort. Snow-capped peaks stretched as far as she could see, and deep valleys filled with morning mist looked like something from a fairy tale. They stopped overnight in a small village where Miguel had friends. The villagers were curious about Elena and her work, gathering around the fire to hear about her search for ancient ruins. An elderly woman named Isabella listened intently to Elena's explanation of her research. "My grandmother spoke of the old people who lived in the high places," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said they left behind great stone circles and walls that reached toward the sky. But she also said those places were guarded by spirits who didn't welcome strangers." Elena thanked Isabella for sharing the story, though she didn't put much stock in warnings about spirits. As a scientist, she focused on facts and evidence rather than supernatural beliefs. Still, She made note of the reference to stone circles and walls which matched descriptions in the colonial documents she had studied. The next morning, Elena and Miguel continued their journey on foot. Each carried a heavy backpack filled with supplies for several weeks in the wilderness. Elena's pack contained her archaeological tools, camera equipment, detailed maps, and a radio for emergency communication. Miguel carried food, cooking equipment, and camping gear. The trail climbed steadily upward through landscapes that changed dramatically with elevation. They started in areas with scattered trees and scrub brush, then moved into regions where only hardy grasses could survive. By afternoon, they were walking through terrain that felt almost alien, rocky slopes where the air was so thin that Elena had to stop frequently to catch her breath. "It takes time to adjust to the altitude," Miguel explained patiently. "Even people who live in the mountains their whole lives feel it when they go this high." That evening, they made camp near a small stream that provided fresh water. Elena set up her radio and made her scheduled contact with the university in Lima. The signal was weak but clear enough to confirm their location and report that everything was going according to plan. "Weather looks good for the next few days," she transmitted. "We should reach the primary search area tomorrow afternoon." The voice that crackled back through the static belonged to Dr. Peterson, Elena's research partner at the university. "Copy that, Elena. Looking forward to your next report. Be safe out there." Elena spent the evening reviewing her maps by flashlight, while Miguel prepared a simple meal over a small camp stove. The coordinates she had calculated from the colonial documents placed the potential site just over the next ridge. If she was right, tomorrow could be the day that changed her career forever. She wrote in her journal before going to sleep, recording her thoughts and observations about the journey so far. "The landscape here is exactly as described in the 1640 manuscript," she wrote. Miguel's knowledge of local legends adds another layer of confirmation. "I have a strong feeling we're close to something significant." What Elena didn't know was that their progress was being watched. Earlier that day, someone with binoculars had observed their movement along the mountain trail. Radio communications, that she assumed were private, were being monitored by people who had their own interests in the region she planned to explore. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Elena woke before sunrise, too excited to sleep longer. She could see her breath in the thin mountain air as she prepared her equipment for what she hoped would be a day of discovery. Miguel was already awake, preparing coffee and a simple breakfast. "Today feels like a good day for finding treasure," he said with a smile, though neither of them realized how prophetic those words would prove to be. They packed up camp and began the final push toward Elena's target coordinates. The terrain became increasingly challenging as they climbed higher, requiring careful navigation around loose rocks and steep drop-offs. But Elena's excitement kept her moving forward, despite the physical demands. Around midday, they crested a ridge and looked down into a valley that took Elena's breath away. Below them, partially hidden by centuries of vegetation growth, were the unmistakable shapes of stone walls and terraced structures that could only have been built by human hands. "Miguel," Elena whispered, afraid to speak too loudly as if that might make the vision disappear. "Do you see what I'm seeing?" Miguel nodded slowly, his eyes wide with amazement. "Your research was correct, Dr. Rodriguez. This is definitely something the world has never seen before." Elena pulled out her camera and began documenting what they could see from their vantage point. Even from a distance, it was clear that the structures below were extensive and well preserved. This wasn't just a small settlement or ceremonial site. It appeared to be a significant urban center that had been completely hidden from the outside world. They spent an hour observing and photographing before making their way down into the valley. Up close, the ruins were even more impressive. Stone blocks fitted together with the precision that characterized the finest Incan architecture formed walls that still stood nearly 20 feet high in some places. Elena's hands shook with excitement as she set up her measuring equipment and began the systematic documentation that would allow other researchers to verify her discovery. This was exactly what she had hoped to find, and possibly even more significant than she had dared to imagine. As the afternoon wore on, Elena made another radio contact with the university. Her voice betrayed her excitement as she reported the discovery. "Peterson, Are you receiving? I need you to document this transmission carefully. We have found structures that appear to be a previously unknown Incan settlement. The site is extensive and remarkably well preserved. I'm transmitting. Exact coordinates now. The response was filled with static, but she could hear Dr. Peterson's excitement even through the poor connection. Elena, this is incredible news. The entire department is going to want to hear about this. How soon can you provide detailed documentation? I need at least a week to do preliminary measurements and photography, Elena replied. This site is going to require a full expedition with multiple specialists. What we've found here could rewrite the textbooks. What Elena didn't know was that other people were also listening to her radio transmissions. Her discovery, which she thought would bring her academic glory, had just put her life in terrible danger. Maria also shared information that had never been included in the official police reports. In the weeks before Elena and Miguel's disappearance, Maria said, strange men had been asking questions around the village about archaeologists and researchers working in the area. They said they were from the government, but they didn't act like government people, Maria explained. They wanted to know about anyone who was looking for old ruins or doing research in the mountains. They offered money for information. This was the first concrete evidence Sophia had found that suggested her mother's disappearance might have been planned rather than random. She carefully documented everything Maria told her and began developing a new theory about what might have happened. Sophia also learned that several mining companies had become active in the region during the 1970s. These companies were interested in the area's mineral resources and might have seen archaeological research as a threat to their operations. If Elena had discovered something that could have led to the protection of the land she was studying, it might have interfered with mining plans. By her junior year, Sophia had assembled a thick file of information that painted a very different picture of her mother's disappearance than the one presented in the official reports. She was no longer looking for someone who had gotten lost in the wilderness. She was looking for someone who had been deliberately targeted because of her work. The investigation was becoming personal in ways that went beyond Sophia's relationship with her mother. She was developing real expertise in South American archaeology and beginning to understand the political and economic forces that shaped research in the region. She was also learning that finding the truth about her mother's fate might be more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Maria also shared information that had never been included in the official police reports. In the weeks before Elena and Miguel's disappearance, Maria said, strange men had been asking questions around the village about archaeologists and researchers working in the area. They said they were from the government, but they didn't act like government people, Maria explained. They wanted to know about anyone who was looking for old ruins or doing research in the mountains. They offered money for information. This was the first concrete evidence Sophia had found that suggested her mother's disappearance might have been planned rather than random. She carefully documented everything Maria told her and began developing a new theory about what might have happened. Sophia also learned that several mining companies had become active in the region during the 1970s. These companies were interested in the area's mineral resources and might have seen archaeological research as a threat to their operations. If Elena had discovered something that could have led to the protection of the land she was studying, it might have interfered with mining plans. By her junior year, Sophia had assembled a thick file of information that painted a very different picture of her mother's disappearance than the one presented in the official reports. She was no longer looking for someone who had gotten lost in the wilderness. She was looking for someone who had been deliberately targeted because of her work. The investigation was becoming personal in ways that went beyond Sophia's relationship with her mother. She was developing real expertise in South American archaeology and beginning to understand the political and economic forces that shaped research in the region. She was also learning that finding the truth about her mother's fate might be more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Sophia's college graduation day should have been one of the happiest moments of her life. But as she walked across the stage to receive her archaeology degree, all she could think about was the investigation that had consumed her thoughts for years. At 22, she had become an expert on South American civilizations, but more importantly, she had developed the skills and knowledge needed to finally pursue the truth about her mother's disappearance. 3 weeks after graduation, Sophia received a package that would change everything. The return address showed it came from Carlos Mendoza, the retired police chief who had worked on Elena's case back in 1974. Sophia had been trying to contact him for months, but his family had told her he was too sick to speak with anyone. Inside, the package was a handwritten letter and a thick manila envelope sealed with tape. The letter was brief but powerful. "Señorita Rodriguez, I am dying, and I cannot take these secrets with me. Your mother was a good woman who deserved better than what happened to her. I was too afraid to pursue this investigation while I was still working. But maybe you can do what I could not. Be very careful. Some people will do anything to keep these secrets buried." Sophia's hands trembled as she opened the sealed envelope. Inside were dozens of photographs, police reports, and handwritten notes that had never been included in the official case file. The documents painted a completely different picture of what had happened in 1974. One photograph showed a man in expensive clothing talking to Miguel Vargas just days before the expedition. Another showed tire tracks near Elena's campsite that didn't match any of the vehicles the search teams had used. Most shocking was a list of names and companies that Mendoza had been investigating secretly for years. At the top of the list was a company called Apex Mining Corporation, which had acquired mineral rights to the exact area where Elena had been conducting her research. The timing was suspicious. The company had filed their claims just 3 months after Elena's disappearance, suggesting they had been planning their move long before her expedition began. Sophia spent days studying every document in Mendoza's secret files. She cross-referenced names with public records and discovered that several people connected to Apex Mining had been in Peru during the summer of 1974. One name kept appearing in different contexts: Richard Blackstone, listed as a security consultant for the mining company. The more Sophia learned about Blackstone, the more convinced she became that he was somehow involved in her mother's disappearance. His background was mysterious: military service in several countries, work for private security companies, and a pattern of being present in locations where environmental activists and researchers had faced threats or violence. Armed with this new information, Sophia decided it was time to travel to Peru and conduct her own investigation. Carmen was terrified at the thought of losing Sophia too, but she understood that her granddaughter would never find peace until she knew the truth. "Promise me you'll be careful," Carmen said as she helped Sophia pack for the trip. "Your mother was careful too, but something still happened to her. Don't trust anyone completely and always let me know where you are." Sophia's first stop in Peru was the village where Miguel Vargas had lived. She wanted to interview his sister Maria in person and see if she could learn anything new about the suspicious men who had been asking questions before the expedition. The bus ride to the village took most of a day, winding through mountain roads that made Sophia feel sick to her stomach. But when she finally arrived and met Maria face to face, she knew the difficult journey had been worth it. Maria was a small, elderly woman with bright eyes that seemed to see right through Sophia. "You look just like your mother," she said, taking Sophia's hands in hers. "Elena was a kind woman who treated my brother with respect, not like some of the other researchers who came through here." Over the next few hours, Maria told Sophia stories about her brother that had never been included in any official reports. Miguel had been worried about something in the weeks before he left with Elena. He had mentioned seeing the same truck parked near the village several times with men inside, who seemed to be watching the comings and goings of anyone who looked like they might be researchers or government officials. "Miguel told me he thought these men were up to no good," Maria explained. "He said they were asking too many questions and offering too much money for simple information. He was thinking about canceling the expedition with your mother, but she had already paid him, and he needed the money for his family." Sophia learned that Miguel had 3 children and a wife who depended on his income as a guide. He wouldn't have taken unnecessary risks, but he also couldn't afford to turn down well-paying work. It was a difficult situation that many people in the region faced regularly. Maria also shared something that made Sophia's heart race with excitement and fear. She still had some of Miguel's personal belongings, including a notebook where he wrote down details about his expeditions. She had never shown it to the police because she couldn't read well and didn't understand its importance. The notebook was small and weather-beaten, but Miguel's handwriting was clear. He had recorded details about every expedition he had guided, including dates, locations, and observations about his clients. The final entry was about Elena's expedition, written just 2 days before they disappeared. Dr. Rodriguez, very excited about her research, Miguel had written. She believes she has found something important, but I am worried about the men who have been watching us. They know too much about her work. I think we are being followed. This was the first direct evidence Sofia had found that her mother and Miguel knew they were in danger before they disappeared. It suggested that whatever happened to them had been planned, not random. Sofia spent the next week interviewing other villagers who remembered the events of 1974. Several people confirmed that strange men had been in the area, asking questions about researchers and archaeological expeditions. Some villagers had been offered money for information about Elena's work, but most had been too suspicious to cooperate. One elderly man named Fernando told Sofia something that made her blood run cold. He had been hunting in the mountains the week after Elena disappeared and had seen helicopters flying over the area where the search teams were looking. But these helicopters hadn't been part of the official search operation. They were flying at night, Fernando explained, with no lights. I hid in the rocks and watched them. They landed somewhere up in the high country and stayed for maybe an hour before leaving. I never told anyone because I was afraid of getting in trouble. Sofia realized that whoever had taken her mother might have used helicopters to move her to a different location, which would explain why the search teams had never found any trace of her. It also suggested that the operation had been well planned and well funded, not the work of simple bandits or criminals. The more information Sofia gathered, the more dangerous her investigation became. She began to notice that she was being followed in the village. The same 2 men seemed to appear wherever she went, always staying just far enough away to avoid direct confrontation, but close enough to make their presence known. One evening, Sofia returned to her small hotel room to find that someone had been through her belongings. Nothing was missing, but her notes had been moved and her laptop had been turned on. Someone was clearly interested in what she was learning and wanted her to know they were watching. That night, Sofia called Carmen and told her about the threats. Her grandmother begged her to come home immediately, but Sofia felt she was getting too close to the truth to give up now. I'm being careful, Grandma, Sofia promised, but I think I'm finally getting somewhere. Mom discovered something that someone was willing to kill to keep secret. I need to find out what it was. Sofia's investigation led her to the capital city, where she hoped to find more information about Apex Mining Corporation and their activities. In the 1970s, she spent days in government archives looking through mining permits and environmental impact reports. What she discovered was shocking. Apex Mining had been planning to develop the area where her mother had been researching for years before Elena's expedition. The company had conducted secret geological surveys and had identified significant gold deposits in the region. Elena's archaeological work would have led to government protection of the area, making mining impossible. Sofia also learned that Apex Mining had a history of problems with environmental activists and researchers who threatened their operations. Several people had faced intimidation, threats, and in some cases, violence when they tried to interfere with the company's plans. As Sofia pieced together the evidence, a clear picture began to emerge. Elena had unknowingly discovered not just archaeological ruins, but also the location of valuable mineral deposits that Apex Mining wanted to exploit. Her research threatened to expose the company's secret plans and potentially cost them millions of dollars in lost profits. The more Sofia learned, the more convinced she became that her mother had been murdered to protect Apex Mining's interests. But proving it would require finding evidence that had been hidden for over 20 years. And getting that evidence would mean confronting people who had already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. Sofia knew she was taking enormous risks, but she also knew she was closer to the truth than anyone had ever been before. Her mother deserved justice, and Sofia was determined to make sure she got it, no matter what the cost might be. Sofia had been back home in California for 3 months, but she couldn't stop thinking about everything she had discovered in Peru. The evidence she had gathered was strong, but she knew it wasn't enough to convince authorities to reopen a case that had been closed for over 20 years. She needed something more, a witness who could connect all the pieces together. Late one evening, while reviewing her notes for the 100th time, Sophia's phone rang. The voice on the other end was weak and spoke with a heavy accent. "Is this Sofia Rodriguez, Elena Rodriguez's daughter?" Sophia's heart began to race. "Yes, this is Sofia. Who is this?" "My name is Ana Huanca. I worked as a translator for Apex Mining back in 1974. I have been following your investigation, and I think it's time someone told you the truth about what really happened to your mother." Sophia's hands were shaking as she grabbed a pen and paper. Ana explained that she was dying of cancer and had decided she couldn't take her secrets to the grave. She had been present during conversations that revealed exactly what had happened to Elena and why. "Can we meet?" Sophia asked urgently. "I can fly to Peru tomorrow if necessary." Ana was living in a small city outside Lima, staying with her daughter while receiving medical treatment. She agreed to meet with Sophia, but warned her to be very careful about who she told about their meeting. The flight to Peru felt like the longest journey of Sophia's life. She had waited over 20 years for answers, and now she was finally going to learn the complete truth about her mother's fate. Carmen had begged her not to go, fearing for Sophia's safety, but Sophia knew this was her only chance to get the testimony she needed. Ana Huanca was a thin, elderly woman whose illness was clearly taking a terrible toll on her body, but her mind was sharp, and her memory of the events from 1974 was crystal clear. She invited Sophia to sit beside her bed and began to tell a story that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "I was 25 years old when I started working for Apex Mining," Ana began slowly. "My job was to translate for the company when they dealt with local communities and government officials. I thought I was helping my country develop its resources, but I learned that some development comes at a terrible price." Ana explained that Apex Mining had been planning their operation in the highlands for years. They had conducted secret geological surveys and discovered that the area contained significant gold deposits. The problem was that the land had potential, archaeological value, which could lead to government protection and make mining impossible. The company executives were very worried about archaeologists finding ruins in the area. Ana continued. They had been monitoring research permits and watching for anyone who showed interest in that particular region. When your mother applied for permission to work there, they became very concerned. Sophia listened in horror as Ana described meetings, where company officials discussed Elena as a problem that needed to be solved. The executives had initially hoped that Elena's research would come up empty, allowing them to proceed with their mining plans without interference. But Elena's radio transmissions about finding significant ruins had changed everything. Her discovery threatened to bring government attention to the area and potentially block the mining operation entirely. The company executives decided that Elena had to be stopped before she could publish her findings or bring other researchers to the site. They hired Richard Blackstone to handle what they called security issues, Ana said, her voice filled with regret. "I didn't understand at first what that meant, but I learned later that Blackstone was brought in to make sure your mother never left the mountains." Ana's testimony confirmed Sophia's worst fears about what had happened to Elena. But the details she provided were even more disturbing than Sophia had imagined. The operation had been carefully planned, with Blackstone and his associates monitoring Elena's movements and communications throughout her expedition. "Blackstone had been watching your mother and Miguel for days before he made his move," Ana explained. "He knew exactly where they were camping and what they had discovered. He wanted to make it look like they had been attacked by bandits, but he also needed to make sure the archaeological site remained secret. Sophia's mother and Miguel had been taken from their campsite during the night. Miguel had been killed immediately because he was considered a witness who could identify Blackstone. But Elena had been kept alive longer because Blackstone needed information about her research and whether she had shared her discovery with anyone else. Your mother was very brave, Ana said, reaching out to take Sophia's hand. Even when she was in terrible danger, she refused to tell them about her research notes or whether other archaeologists knew about the site. She was trying to protect her discovery and her colleagues. Anna's voice broke as she described Elena's final hours. Blackstone had eventually realized that Elena wasn't going to cooperate, and he had made the decision to kill her. Her body had been disposed of in an abandoned mine shaft, which was then sealed with explosives to hide the evidence. Sophia wept as she listened to Anna's testimony, finally learning the details of her mother's last days after wondering about them for so many years. But even through her grief, she was taking careful notes and recording everything Anna told her. The most shocking revelation came when Anna explained how the cover-up had been maintained for over 20 years. Apex Mining had paid bribes to local officials to ensure that the investigation remained superficial. They had also used their influence to discourage other archaeologists from working in the area. The company made a lot of money from that mining operation, Anna said bitterly. They extracted millions of dollars worth of gold from the land where your mother died. Every nugget they pulled from the ground was paid for with her blood. Anna also revealed that she wasn't the only former Apex Mining employee who knew the truth about Elena's murder. Several other people had been present during meetings where the cover-up was planned, but most were too afraid to come forward. Some had been threatened or intimidated when they considered speaking out. I kept quiet for all these years because I was afraid for my family, Anna admitted. But I'm dying now, and I realize that staying silent makes me just as guilty as the people who killed your mother. She deserves justice, and you deserve to know the truth. Sophia spent 3 days with Anna, recording her testimony and gathering copies of documents that Anna had kept from her time with Apex Mining. The evidence was overwhelming and provided the missing pieces that Sophia needed to build a complete case against the people responsible for her mother's murder. When Sophia returned to California, she immediately contacted law enforcement agencies and human rights organizations. The case attracted attention from journalists and activists who had been investigating corporate violence in South America. Sophia's story became part of a larger movement demanding accountability for companies that had harmed local communities and researchers. The evidence Sophia had gathered, combined with Anna's testimony, was strong enough to convince international prosecutors to pursue charges against Richard Blackstone. It took months of legal battles, but eventually, Blackstone was located in South Africa, where he was working as a security consultant for another mining company. The extradition process was complicated and slow, but Sophia never gave up pressure on the authorities. She organized letter-writing campaigns, gave interviews to journalists, and spoke at conferences about corporate accountability. Her mother's case became a symbol of the dangers faced by researchers and activists who threatened powerful business interests. Finally, in 2007, Richard Blackstone was brought to Peru to face trial for Elena's murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his lawyers advised him to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a lengthy trial that he was likely to lose. As part of the plea agreement, Blackstone was required to reveal the location of Elena's remains. After 33 years of wondering where her mother was buried, Sophia finally learned that Elena's body was in a sealed mine shaft, about 20 miles from where she had been conducting her research. The recovery of Elena's remains was an emotional and difficult process. Sophia was present when the sealed mine shaft was opened, and she was finally able to see her mother's body after more than 3 decades of searching. It was a moment of both terrible sadness and incredible relief. Elena Rodriguez was finally laid to rest in a ceremony attended by archaeologists, human rights activists, and family members who had never stopped believing that the truth would eventually be revealed. Sophia gave a speech at the funeral, thanking everyone who had helped her find answers and promising that her mother's work would continue. "My mother died because she discovered something beautiful and important," Sophia said through her tears. She found evidence of an ancient civilization that deserved to be studied and protected. The people who killed her wanted to destroy that history for profit, but they failed. Her discovery will be preserved, and her memory will inspire other researchers to continue seeking truth, no matter how dangerous that search might be. Sophia established the Elena Rodriguez Foundation for Archaeological Protection, which provides security resources and legal support for researchers working in dangerous areas. The foundation also advocates for stronger international laws protecting scientists and activists from corporate intimidation and violence. Years later, Sophia returned to the Peruvian highlands where her mother had made her final discovery. The Aube archaeological site had been designated as a protected area, ensuring that it could never be destroyed by mining operations. Sophia completed her mother's research, confirming Elena's theories about ancient trade routes and publishing papers that honored her mother's memory. Standing among the ancient ruins that had cost her mother's life, Sophia felt a mixture of sadness and pride. Elena's murder had been a terrible tragedy, but the truth had finally been revealed and justice had been served. More importantly, Elena's work lived on, contributing to humanity's understanding of its own history and inspiring future generations of researchers to continue the search for knowledge, no matter what obstacles they might face.